weekend, we're talking hoops. And you know our guys will ramble.
Can you just email me the rest of this story?
This is Just Dubs with John Dickinson.
Dickinson's an underrated talent, 100%.
On KNBR 104.5 and 6.8. Streaming live at KNBR.com and on the KNBR app.
Steph double screen. Let's read fly by. GP2 into Looney. Curry, corner side step three. Good! He just keeps moving, and they'll forget about him. Made a mistake. Loose side of him. Steph Curry strikes again. Steph's got 29, 7 made threes.
Yeah, Naz Reid with the mistake there. Steph Curry winds up with 31. That from Wednesday night in Minneapolis, as the Warriors did win that game over the Timberwolves, 116-115. The Warriors can beat the Timberwolves. We know that. Can they win enough here over the next 3 weeks, though, to promote some change and maybe some additions and augmentations to this roster as the Warriors begin a critical stretch here of their season as they are back at 500 following the game against the Timberwolves. We welcome you in here on a Saturday morning. Just Dubs, JD, John Dickinson with you for the next 2 hours here on KNBR. 808 KNBR is the number, 415-808-5627 to jump in and join the conversation, and a lot to get into here over the course of the next 2 hours. And also want to set the table. We mentioned a critical stretch for the Warriors here as they begin a set of 8 of the next 9 at Chase Center tonight. The Warriors and the Washington Wizards, Jordan Poole, back in the house at Chase Center tonight. But 8 of the next 9 at home. It all leads right up to the trade deadline, which is under 3 weeks away now, 19 days away on February 6th, the trade deadline. So the Warriors have, and I'll run through them very quickly here, Washington tonight as they sit at 20-20. Boston on Monday afternoon, the MLK holiday. Then they go to Sacramento, come home to take on the Bulls in the second of a back-to-back. The Lakers are at Chase a week from tonight in a big ABC Saturday night showcase game, then a couple of days off, and then a home back-to-back against the Jazz and Thunder before the Suns come in, an open weekend 2 weeks from today, February 1st and 2nd. Then the Warriors take on Orlando before going to Utah, and then there's a trade deadline. So 10 games to go, 8 of those 10 before the trade deadline, and the Warriors play on the day of the trade deadline in Los Angeles against the Lakers, which is the second of a 6-game road trip leading into the All-Star break. So with everything that's been going on surrounding this team over the last week, and really with the 12-3 start and then the 8-17 aftermath to that start over the last 25 games, to get to 40 games in, and the halfway mark of the season is tonight at the conclusion of the Warriors and the Wizards over at Chase Center. But with everything going on, and will the Warriors look to make even marginal improvements to the roster? The discussion about the state of the Warriors franchise as it relates to the roster and how good this team has been, or disappointing that this team has been since the 12-3 start, and the debate that just it rages on as to how the Warriors look to try and improve the roster, if they even do look to try and improve the roster at the trade deadline, or whether the best cause of action for the Dubs is to kick the can down the road one more time and head into the offseason looking to potentially add the number 2 scorer and second star next to Steph Curry, as Steph Curry comes up here on the next 2 months, which it's going to be his 37th birthday on March the 14th of 2025 here. So just under 2 months away from that. So a lot to get into as to what the Warriors do here. But I said it during the week, and I'll kind of start the show here, and we'll run through everything because it has been a busy and chaotic week. Not so much on the rumor mill with the Warriors as far as who they are going to look to go get. The Nikola Vucevic name is still out there, by the way. Did you see Nikola Vucevic and his line? And we've got Kyle Haar and Raf Corral in our San Francisco studios. Kyle, I got to ask you, bring you into the conversation here before we continue to set the table. Did you see Nikola Vucevic's line last night by chance?
I did. I actually saw something on Twitter. Yeah, it was like 40 points, 11 rebounds. And well, then I saw someone, sarcastically say, but he's the advanced metrics say he's the worst defensive center in the league.
He is among the worst defensive centers in the league. That part, again, it's two things can be equally true. Yeah, 40 and 13 for Vucevic last night on 17 of 25. This is the part that I thought this is where you were going when you were mentioned the metrics. The one thing I do think you have to add to the bottom of that, 40, 13, 17 to 25 shooting, home loss to Charlotte. Home loss to Charlotte for the Bulls last night in Chicago. And so, yeah, it was a great night for Vucevic, and the Bulls are suddenly struggling again. They do the thing where they get like 5-6 games under and then get to like 2 under and think they're in it, and then they fall flat and they need to trade everybody. But yeah, so Nikola Vucevic, the one name that still seemingly is linked to the Warriors, a big game for him, and he's had quite a few big games. So we'll see if the Warriors look to add and at what position they look to add and all of that. Appreciate everybody watching on YouTube and Twitch this morning as well here on KNBR. And Andis Brown in there. Yeah, morning JD, Kyle, and staff, and all. We got estimated eyes in the chat. CA, appreciate everybody that files in. Rockin' New Era 84. Hey, yo, what's going on? Let's ride. The Saturday morning show, a little lighter, a little more low-key as we look to build this thing out. But we are here for you for the next couple of hours and tonight as well. And I want to make sure I mention that with the 8 of the next 9. So we're going to be going hard at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City beginning tonight. So stop by and say hi if you're coming to the game, or if you're in the area, or if you just want to chat. Would love to hear from you as always. And then Monday, want to make sure we got a lot to promote here. Monday, going to be on from Harmonic in Thrive City before and after the Warriors take on the Celtics, noon to 2. So the final 2 hours before the Warriors and Celtics, will be on from Harmonic in Thrive City before the game. I'm going to be on with Dieter Kurtenbach from 10 to 2 as well. And then after the game, we've got our Dubs OT meet and greet show. Come watch the national championship game between Ohio State and Notre Dame, and come talk some Warriors and Celtics in the aftermath of what really is one of the marquee games on the schedule, given Stephen Curry and what he did in leading the Warriors to their last NBA championship in Boston. Now, hard to believe, almost 3 years ago, as we dip into 2025, and that being back in 2022. And typically the MLK holiday is the number 2 day on the NBA calendar, really, in terms of they try to put a lot of the biggest games, Christmas being number 1. And this Saturday night when the NFL gives way and you get to Championship Sunday, this coming Saturday is another big one, and that's where you get the Warriors and the Lakers going at it again from Chase, as they did on Christmas night. They will do it again a week from tonight as well. So a lot to get into. 808 KNBR 415-808-5627. Question du jour here off the top of the show, and we'll get into more detail as it relates to everything that Draymond Green said, which really got this whole thing going with his interview and subsequent piece from Vincent Goodwill of Yahoo Sports about where the Warriors are at and not wanting to do something that panics and sets the Warriors back 5 to 7 years. Are there smaller moves to be made? I mean, I've maintained that just because there isn't a big move to be made, or you don't want to set yourself up to mortgage the entire future, there are still smaller moves that can be made that can help give this team a little bit of a push. I have seen enough as it relates to this team, although I will hold out as to what happens over the course of these next 10 games for a final decision. But I think when you look at this week and the loss to Toronto and the subsequent angry get back, show a lot of fight win at Minnesota, which coincided with all of the discourse surrounding the Warriors and what they look to do moving forward here, and whether or not Steph Curry and Steve Kerr and the debate that was making its way through the sports world in the early part of this week as to whether or not this team was going to continue to fight. These next 2.5, 3 weeks are going to show, I think, just the level at which this team continues to fight. And I think in the process, playing better over the course of the next couple of weeks and getting on a little bit of a mini run might give the organization a little bit of a nudge to augment at the smaller level that I think could help continue to stoke this thing for the Warriors to fight beyond the All-Star break and on into March. Because the reality is, even if you don't think this team can win a championship, there is still a middle ground to be had that I don't think wrecks the Warriors' future. And I think it also makes this second half of the season, which officially starts on Monday, a lot more interesting and a lot more watchable for this Warrior fan base. And I do think there is I do think the Warriors owe the fans that, at a bare minimum. Yes, continuing to compete and fight, but also when you're as close as they are to having the potential to still earning a playoff spot, I do think even moves on the margins to look to do that make a lot of sense. I think so often we get caught in the, well, if you can't win a championship, then either do nothing or tear the thing down. We know they're not tearing it down. And so if they're not going to tear it down, well, the next closest thing is just kind of this just keep things going, keep taking those L's, keep resting guys, continuing to maybe look at some of the young players that you've got, evaluate the roster. I also think a part of this thing is the fact that the Warriors did not want to come off as desperate as they continue to struggle as mightily as they have over the last couple of weeks. So we'll get into all of that, setting the table here, 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627. What makes the second half of this season for the Warriors a successful one? Does it mean you have to make a big move here in the next 3 weeks, which doesn't sound like it's coming? Is it shutting it down and heading toward next season, and the best opportunity to maybe get a star and get back into title contention comes from there? We've heard that before, by the way. Kick the can down the road, kick the can down the road, kick the can down the road. Kick the can down the road, Steph Curry's going to be 40. Keep kicking the can down the road. And then those timelines won't align either. But what gets you through these next 40 games? That's the question I ask of those watching on YouTube and Twitch. Golden State Lumber and Building Materials text line is open as well. 808 KNBR, it's Just Dubs with JD, off and rolling here on a Saturday on the Sports Leader.
This is KNBR, and this is Just Dubs with John Dickinson, streaming live on YouTube at KNBR 1045.
We've got a good stretch here at home, and today was a good practice. We need to pick up where we left off, carry forward the momentum that comes from beating Minnesota on the road, and go get another win tomorrow, and just keep stacking good days together.
All right, Steve Kerr, yesterday, as the Warriors back at home off of the 4-game road trip, they end up 2-2. They kick one away at Toronto, but then they bounce back. They get one against Minnesota after holding on for dear life to win in Detroit to begin the trip, and then they gave Stephen Curry and Draymond Green. Draymond Green's been out, here these last few games, and Stephen Curry missing the second of the back-to-back against Indiana. We'll see another back-to-back coming up with the game in Sacramento Wednesday, and then home game against Chicago on Thursday, the Nikola Vucevic showcase game on the 23rd. I kid, as we welcome you back here to Just Dubs with JD, John Dickinson here on a Saturday morning. 808 KNBR 415-808-5627. The YouTube chat is open as well. Appreciate everybody chiming in there, and Steve Kerr making the point that the Warriors' best course is to continue to build with what they have. And look, that's all they can do at this point until a move is made, or until the Warriors send the message with their play that this team is worth adding to. I think that's the realization that I started to have during the week as they were losing the game in Toronto, that they were up 9 in the fourth quarter. And that was the moment at which, and I know they bounced back and got the win at Minnesota, but that was the moment at which the realization for me hit that this team, as it's currently constituted, like they're not making the playoffs. They're not making the playoffs without help. Like, they're not getting on a run. Steph and Draymond are not going to play enough games, consistently, whether it's Steph getting back-to-backs off, or whether it's Draymond with the injury. And look, Steph's been banged up too. It's not just straight rest, in fairness. I mean, he's been dealing with the thumb thing. He's been dealing with the knee thing here for really the better part of almost 2 months now. I think that started to come on toward the end of November, and we're headed now here toward the back third of January. So that's not nothing, but and I just think we've seen what the rest of this roster is. With Kuminga, without Kuminga, obviously a little bit better with Kuminga, given how dependent they had started to become on him. But he hasn't played here in the last 2 weeks due to his own injury, set to get reevaluated next week. So we'll see. I think Kuminga's still probably closer to 2 weeks away from a return from that ankle that he sustained back on the 4th, 2 weeks ago tonight, in the game the Warriors won against the Grizzlies. So, I think this is the critical stretch here. Whether it's, you want to say it's the next 8 of 9 at home with the one game in Sacramento next week, if you want to add the game in Utah on February 5th as a 10th game before the All-Star break, I guess we can do that for the purposes of this conversation. And then you look forward at this being the second half now of the season. And I'll ask the chat, as I did before the break, and if you want to chime in at 808 KNBR, what makes the second half successful for the Warriors? But I want to set up just everything that's happened again here during the week. And this all started back in Detroit, because that's when Vincent Goodwill of Yahoo Sports caught up with Draymond Green in a piece that dropped Monday. So talk to him when the Warriors were in Detroit, and then that piece drops Monday as the Warriors are set to take on Toronto. And in that story, and everybody obviously knows the what was said at this point, but just reading a couple of the quotes, the key ones. And Draymond to Vince Goodwill of Yahoo Sports. Check out the full story here. The beautiful part of being in the space we're in, Steve Kerr, Steph Curry, and myself all disagree with mortgaging off the future of this organization, saying we're going for it right now. Bad teams do that. Bad organizations do that. We're not neither one. So for us, if something is going to happen, it needs to be the right thing. We're not going to jump and make the wrong decision because we panicked. That's how you set your organization back 5 to 7 years. And then Draymond adding later on, when I'm done, when Steph's done, I want us to come back. When Steve's done, I want us to come back, sit on the court, and talk so much ish. I made an edit there to everybody because our organization, our team is that good. Here's the thing. I think there's a misconception here that, that people want the Warriors to give up their next 5 draft picks and do it for Jimmy Butler, who, by the way, came back and played last night for Miami off of the 7-game suspension. They got blown out at home by Denver. And so he's back playing here with 3 weeks to go until the trade deadline. But I don't think there's a difference between understanding. And look, the Warriors tried to make the big move, as we've all discussed. They tried to make a couple of big moves. They went after Lauri Markkanen. Didn't work out. Jazz weren't really serious about making a deal. Maybe the Warriors weren't totally serious about including enough in the deal to make it worth Utah's while. I think, that's the normal part of trade negotiations. Paul George with the Clippers, I don't know how Lauri Markkanen would have worked out, by the way, at that point, but he's having a down year by comparison to the last couple of years. Would he be better with the Warriors? I think he would have been better with the Warriors had he come over, but he's off the table now. Paul George, the contract that the Warriors would have had to have given Paul George. And look, those of you that have followed me and heard me and watched over the years, I am not the biggest Paul George fan as a 1 or a 2 on a roster. I think Paul George at this stage, and really I think for the last decade, has been he really is morphed into more of a 3 in terms of like his impact. He just doesn't. Paul George to me is not a true winning player he's a great player. He's not a winning player in the big moments to me. He falls short as a franchise player. If you consider him a 1A, which I think the Warriors were obviously going to be considering him a 2. I think as a number 2 option, that's there's a debate to be had as a number 2. I think at this point, as he starts to get up there, I think he's really more of got to be your 3rd best player if you're going to be a title contending team as opposed to your 2nd best player. I thought there was potential for him to be that in Philadelphia. So I'm not sure that the Paul George thing would have worked at the level that people think it would with the Warriors. Now, that being said, I was on board with both of those moves that did not get made because I did think the Warriors should look, and I still do think they should look to do more for the now than they do for the future. But nobody's saying jump in and mortgage everything. And again, that's where there is some nuance to the conversation because everybody has a different definition of what they believe mortgaging the future truly is. I mean, some believe giving up Jonathan Kuminga in a trade is mortgaging the future because Jonathan Kuminga projects to be a future star. And that in and of itself is mortgaging the future, let alone if you give up Kuminga and 2 or 3 first-round picks, and you can't trade your first-round pick in consecutive years by NBA rule. And you can do things with pick swaps and the like to where you're not trading your pick necessarily for nothing. And the Warriors, I believe, have 1 future pick tied up at this point. But when you look at it, I don't think anybody's saying trade 3-4 future first-round picks plus Jonathan Kuminga plus the proper salary filler for Jimmy Butler. And if that's what it would take, I can understand why. I mean, I've made both cases why you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. Beyond Jimmy Butler and beyond the moves that were not made in the offseason, as you start to look at this thing for the Warriors, all right, well, where are the superstars coming from at this point? Are there superstars available? And I think that's where you can say, no, there aren't at this point. Now, there are, I think, players that can help the Warriors, but I think the problem is, I think the Warriors have been a little bit too vocal, and Draymond started this whole thing. They've been a little bit too vocal about what they're not going to do. They've been a little bit too vocal, and we're going to play some of the clips, and we're going to read some of the quotes here. Been a little bit too vocal about, one, what they're not going to do, two, about seemingly comfortable with their plight. And again, it's one thing if you are just mid and you're going out there and you're battling every night, and you're fighting your ass off, and you're just mid. You're just a 500 team. I don't feel like the Warriors have done that. I think that there's a consistency in terms of the effort and execution and playability of some of these guys that hasn't been there at the level to where, like, I don't think it's been that full on, well, this team's done as well as they can, and this is just what it is, and everybody has to accept it. I think there is a slight improvement that can be made, but I also think there's an acceptance that's starting to set in, and this is the part that I don't like, that this team can't be better than it's been to this point. That the 12-3 at this point was a mirage. I think you would all agree with that. I think it was a part of having a real nice initial plan to your season. So I don't think it was a mirage, but they put a lot of effort and energy into the moves that they made in the offseason, the fit between all of those players, having a more meaningful training camp, having a more meaningful preseason, really coming out ahead of other teams at the start of the season. And they did it, and they had a little bit of a favorable schedule, and that's why they were able to win. But it wasn't just Portland and Utah they were beating. They were also beating Dallas, and they were also beating Boston, and they were also beating Oklahoma City. So they used the fact that they were able to beat some of those lesser teams to get them into a role where they went and beat some really good teams, and some of those teams on the road. Where I bristle is the notion that this is just what this team is, and they're just going to continue for half of this season being what they've been without looking to add any help to it, and maybe even shutting it down a little bit once you get through this stretch of home games and the All-Star break, and then you come out of it and you start to look at where you are in the standings, and then do you shut it down further? Because here's the reality: the Warriors right now are 20-20. They're 11th in the West. They're on the outside looking in via tiebreaker of the play-in tournament. They wouldn't even be in the play-in tournament right now. Play-in tournament right now is Dallas, Minnesota, a couple of teams underachieving, and Dallas dealing with some injuries of late. Dallas, Minnesota, Sacramento, and Phoenix. And the Kings have won 8 of 9, I believe, to get to the point where they're won over at 21-20. Halfway through their season. The Warriors will see Sacramento again coming up next week. Suns are 20-20, but looking to make moves, looking to make big moves. The Suns are looking to do, because they've already mortgaged a lot of their future, they're looking to do what the Warriors are hell-bent on saying they're not doing. I think there's an interesting parallel there where the Warriors, every time the Warriors say we're not doing this, we don't want to do that, dumb organizations do X, Y, and Z, I feel like they're almost directing a intentional shot at the Phoenix Suns, it feels like, because the Suns are like, yeah, let's do it. Ishbia is like, let's do it. Ishbia is like, yeah, we trade everybody for Jimmy Butler, all those future picks, trade more future picks, cash coming back, I'll pay it. Luxury tax bill, no problem. All those things. I'm not saying it's the right course of action, but they are, I think, also trying to prevent Kevin Durant from asking out here. But they are right now reaping the albatross that is Bradley Beal and their first all-in move that basically didn't work out, going back to adding Bradley Beal into the mix. So, but here's the reality: Warriors are 2.5 out of 6th. They're 3 out of 5th right now. 5th in the West is 23-17. It's the Clippers. It's the Clippers and the Lakers. So not great teams. I think you would think that Dallas and Minnesota would be the teams that would be in that, and maybe the Clippers and Lakers would be teams in the play-in, and it certainly could shake out that way as Dallas gets healthier, and Minnesota's got to figure out what the heck they're going to do. They look like a discombobulated bunch themselves. And the irony of the Warriors and Timberwolves, the Warriors, since they've sucked in these last 25 games, have beaten the Timberwolves 3 times. So that doesn't look good for the Timberwolves, who are 22 and 19 and a major disappointment given some of the moves they made, some cost-cutting moves that they made going back to the offseason and letting go of Karl Anthony Towns. But what I'm getting at is you're right there. And here's the realization that I had this week. This team can't get to 6th as they're currently constituted. But you know what? They can get to 6th if they make a couple of moves on the margins. And could Nikola Vucevic be one of those moves? Sure. I still think, and I've said this a lot, I won't spend a ton of time talking about it. Cam Johnson, somebody I would be willing to give up a couple of first-round picks for. He's not a superstar. He's been a little too injured, I think, lately for my liking. But he is a shooter that I think would help open things up for the Warriors in ways that allow a lot more formidable lineups to be played. Again, especially if you could get him without giving up Kuminga. I'm at the point where I've said this. I understand the reluctance as this team dips in the standings to not want to give up Kuminga. But the bill is coming due in terms of what you're going to ultimately have to pay Jonathan Kuminga. And so I wonder what the chatter winds up being, because I think the injury basically meant, and the team's poor performance, that the Warriors would be reluctant to deal Kuminga, because I think they would want to be in a position where they felt that by dealing him, they were really significantly moving themselves up into playoff and or contention territory. And I just don't think they're at a point where they're going to be in contention territory. And plus, it's also been well noted and reported in the fact that the Warriors only want to trade Kuminga for a star, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so, again, I can understand more and more as time passes and this team looks at where they are, why you would be reluctant. But if you're reluctant, you still got to pay him. And so, again, if it's not Cam Johnson, maybe it's another, wing player that can stretch the floor a little bit, that isn't 6'3" or 6'4", like somebody that's more in the 6'7", 6'8" range that can shoot it a little bit. I like the Vucevic move. I like the addition of trying to get a big, but I think the difference between allowing this team, I think there needs to be a small investment in this team to continue to keep this team fighting. And I feel like if this team continues to keep fighting, they actually would have a shot to maybe get the 6th or the 5th seed, considering how mediocre things are in the Western Conference. And if that means you end up 7th or 8th, so be it. You go through the play-in tournament, which hasn't worked to well for the Warriors the couple of times that they've been in it, including last year when they got the doors blown off in Sacramento, and they ended up with a very quick exit, despite the fact that they finished the year strong. This was the point last year where the Warriors got on a roll. I think it was 27-12 in the last 39 games. I don't see that for this team. Maybe you disagree. 808 KNBR. So Draymond set the table for all of this. And I don't think anything Draymond said was unreasonable. But then you had Steve Kerr addressing what Draymond said during his pregame press conference on Monday, as we kind of roll through all of this. And then we'll get to some of the quotes as Steve talked to Anthony Slater at shoot around the day of the Toronto loss. But here was Steve Monday pregame on the state of the Warriors at large.
It's sort of the reality of sports and life in general. You get older and you're trying to stay at the top of the mountain, and no matter how you slice it, it's not going to last forever. So you want it to last for as long as possible, and you put every ounce of effort into making that happen as best you can. These runs that you're talking about, they happen because of Michael Jordan and Steph Curry, these once in a generation players. And so you ride those guys as long as you can, as long as they're capable, and then you've got to move forward, and everything changes. And so I think that's where we are right now. Steph is still playing at a really high level. The last couple of years, we've been fighting like crazy and competing just to stay in the game. Last year, 46 wins wasn't even enough to get in the playoffs. So it's gotten tough and tougher and tougher. But we're fighting, and we're going to keep going until we're not going anymore.
As far as the last part of that, it looks like 46 wins is right there to where it could get you in the playoffs. It seems like the bar is lower. Obviously, in the second half, the teams that are more serious start to win more consistently at a higher level. But it feels like there's two spots that are available for a team that can get to 46 wins that weren't necessarily available last year when you looked at and I'm doing this off the top of my head. I think it ended up you had to get to 50 to get to the top 6, and then you had a couple of teams after that. It was the Pelicans who were right there. I think 49. The Kings ended up 46 with the Warriors. The Pelicans lost their first play-in game and then won their second play-in game against Sacramento after Sacramento knocked the Warriors out. So you look at all of that. The Lakers ended up getting in as the 7 because they knocked out the Pelicans and sent the Pelicans to have to play Sacramento. It was, I think it's more like low 40s for the play-in. I think the play-in is more going to be like 44-ish wins. It feels like, which is definitely on the tape. But I think the 5 and the 6 are more like 46, 47 wins this year, as opposed to you got to get to 50. And so, that's where Steve Kerr was at in terms of trying to keep things going. Steve sat down with Anthony Slater. Anthony Slater, the Athletic, put this out and some good quotes on what was going on. And Steve has mentioned this in the past, wanting to make sure the Warriors handle themselves with dignity and competitiveness and fight. I'm reading a quote here. We want to maintain what has made us the Warriors, what has made us into this organization. That means we have to keep fighting, but it means handling the pain and the indignity of losing with a dignified response. I think that manifests itself in a lot of ways. One of those things is don't do anything crazy. Let's maintain the integrity of the operation. I think everybody's on board and aligned with that. We all want the organization to do as well as possible going forward. And we all agree it would really be irresponsible to jeopardize the future to take a wild stab at something. So again, I think we can all agree that the wild stab isn't there to be made. I think where the middle ground is, and we're going to get to the Steph Curry portion of this, because Steph commented after the horrendous loss in Toronto, and he sent this thing, I think, in part with what Steve said, that there's just kind of and look, I think everybody loves Steve, but there's a way that Steve at times in really being diplomatic and appropriate can come off as indifferent. And so he's got a little bit of the Popovich to him, where he's being real and he's being truthful, and he doesn't do it with the caustic tone. But I think because he does it in a more casual tone, it kind of comes off as, yeah, we're cool. We want to keep fighting, but hey, there's nothing you can do. And this is the NBA, and might just be a 41-win team, and Steph might just not ever playing back-to-backs, and Draymond's going to miss some time, and just ride off into the sunset, heads held high as the 12th seed. Now, I'm inferring that. I'm inferring how I don't and wouldn't appreciate it if I were a Warrior fan. But I think on the one hand, it's preaching fight and all these different things. But on the other hand, it's kind of like, yeah, you know what, low key, just don't have it. Might have to deal with it. So I think that partial response to what Draymond had to say and what we're going to play coming up next as it relates to what Stephen Curry had to say really set the table for a storm that after the win against Minnesota kind of kicked everything back in the other direction. What does it ultimately mean? I think the next 10 games probably tell the story as to whether the Warriors are posturing here, whether they're trying to come off not sounding desperate, and just where the true fight is. Because I think another piece of this conversation is the fact that champion level players know when they don't have enough. And I think clearly Draymond and Steph know, and Steve Kerr as a coach knows they don't have enough to contend for and win a title. And when you know that as a group that has been to the top of the mountain and battled at that highest level, there just isn't a value in fighting for the 5th and the 6th seed. There just isn't it's not worth it. It doesn't get your juices going on January 18th when the Wizards are coming in. Now, maybe facing Jordan Poole gets the juices flowing for Draymond Green for a night. And so I think there's just these little motivational issues with this team as it's currently constituted that lead up to, they don't have enough. They don't have enough. And so how do you, as an organization, continue to keep fighting? To me, it's by going and making those middling moves. It's by going and making the moves on the margins. And look, the Dennis Schroeder move is a move on the margins. I applauded it. It hasn't worked out great. Still time. Could Dennis Schroeder ultimately be somebody that winds up getting moved in a deal potentially for something else? I just don't think the Warriors can sit back and do nothing. If the Warriors sit back and do nothing between now and the deadline, I think they're destined to being anywhere between 9th and 12th in the Western Conference, and maybe on the outside looking in of even the play-in tournament. And I'm sorry, if this team ends up there, if they end up 11 or 12, that's an embarrassment. I mean, that really is an embarrassment. So the proof as to whether or not they're fighting is on the court on a night-in, night-out basis. The proof to whether they're fighting as an organization is what they do here in the next 19 days, or what they don't do here over the course of the next 19 days. 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627. We'll get to some comments from the YouTube chat coming up. We'll also hear what Steph Curry's had to say about all of this as the Warriors continue to be mid, losing in horrendous fashion at Toronto late, and then, of course, winning at Minnesota, because that's just what they do. They own Minnesota, even as a bad 8-17 team in their last 25 games. It's Just Dubs with JD, John Dickinson, here on the Sports Leader.
live from downtown.
Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang!
This is Just Dubs with John Dickinson on the Sports Leader, streaming live at KNBR.com and on the KNBR app.
Look, just for the record, the Warriors absolutely want to make a trade.
Yeah.
Pining for a trade. No question about it. Joe, it takes all he has to just be patient with this. The least patient person of this is probably Joe. They definitely want to make a trade. The question is, do you just make a trade and get cooked, or do you just hold on and wait till everybody's dealing? See, look, the thing they might be able to do that you take off the table if you trade now is you could be a third team in a trade. You can't do that now if nobody else is trading.
Right.
So you got to wait until the deadline. That's when people are trading.
And will the Warriors survive until the deadline is the question. That was Marcus Thompson. He joined Copes and Derek Papa on Dirty Work yesterday. Here as we welcome you back to Just Dubs with JD, John Dickinson here on the Sports Leader. 808 KNBR, the number, 415-808-5627. I don't disagree with Marcus on the notion that the Warriors desperately want to make a deal. They do desperately want to make a deal, or they want the perception to be out there that they desperately want to make a deal. I think that's also part of it. They don't want to get cooked. I think we all know that. They don't want the perception of them getting cooked. But again, I think the inaction in part is from a lack of confidence right now in their ability to evaluate the exact kind of players that might be available that can be brought in to help versus what you would give up. And, Monty Poole wrote about this of NBC Sports Bay Area, and it's something that I've said for almost 2 years, going back to the beginning of last year, almost 2 seasons, I guess, a little over a year on the calendar. But I was saying it, we kind of knew Kuminga and Moody were not part of a future core 2 years ago, in all likelihood. I think the jury's still out maybe on Kuminga because he is so uber talented. But, he wrote about it this week, Monty, the fact that, hey, anybody that thinks that Kuminga and Moody and Pajemski and Trace Jackson Davis are standalone, I'm paraphrasing, but basically standalone 4/5 of a next, a starting lineup that's going to be winning playoff games or contending. You're fooling yourself, one, and it's disrespectful to the guys that the Warriors did have who were all-time greats and legends and all of those things. So at that point, I think the Warriors are doing this dance between how the league views their young talent versus how they've projected their young talent versus not wanting the appearance to be, oh, you only got that for Moses Moody? Oh, you only got that for Pajemski? He was untradeable 6 months ago. He was. So I think, you traded Kuminga for a role player? Even if he's a really good role player that can help you, Cam Johnson. They're not doing that, I know. But they don't want to get cooked. They don't want the perception to get cooked. But what's worse than the perception of getting cooked in a trade, and we'll get to the YouTube chat coming up, 808 KNBR, Golden State Lumber and Building Materials text line, open as well here. It's Just Dubs at JD on a Saturday morning. KNBR 104.5 FM and 680 AM San Francisco, a Cumulus media station. As we approach hour number 2 here of Just Dubs, we'll keep this thing going until noon, and then back tonight from Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City after the Warriors take on the Wizards here, beginning this stretch of 8 of 9 at home and 10 games to go now before the trade deadline on February the 6th. 19 days to go before the trade deadline coming up on February 6th. The one thing worse than getting cooked in a trade, though, is the perception that you're giving up on a season when you have multi-time champions and future Hall of Famers. And so this is what led the Warriors to have that perception of them be discussed this week. We talked about Draymond and his comments to Yahoo Sports, Steve Kerr pregame comments in Toronto, and also some of the quotes about riding out this end of the championship era to Anthony Slater of The Athletic. Well, here is Stephen Curry now post-game following a brutal loss to the Raptors, who were 8-31. And Steph was all about the future and the long term and keeping the franchise in a good place. Here's Steph.
Desperate trades or desperate, moves that deplete the future. Like, there is a responsibility on allowing, keeping the franchise in a good space and good spot when it comes to where we leave this thing when we're done. Doesn't mean that you're not trying to get better. Doesn't mean that you're not active in any type of search to, if you have an opportunity where a trade makes sense, or even in the summer free agency makes sense, like, you want to continue to get better. Nobody wants to be stale or be in a situation where you're passing up opportunities, but it doesn't mean that you're desperate, just flinging assets all around the place just because you want to do something. So there's Mike understands, like, we want to win. We want to be in that position where, we've always said that you want to be relevant in the championship type of chase while, we understand we're getting older and deeper into our careers and allowing some of the young guys to kind of blossom. But it doesn't mean you're getting desperate. So it's better to kind of be patient, understand what that looks like. And I know, Mike is always on the phone trying to figure it out. That's what a good GM does. Doesn't mean there's a deal on the table. Doesn't mean that you're desperate. Doesn't mean that you're just flinging, like I said, assets all the way around and being reckless with it.
All right, so there you go. The responsibility of keeping the franchise in a good space long term. That was perhaps accurately, because I think that the three headliners that still remain to this championship era of Warriors basketball, even if they're beyond being a championship team, at least for the time being, I think we can all agree on that. From Draymond, who kind of forced Steph and Steve to have to address it, and then I think Steph and Steve painted their comments while aligned with Draymond in a light that basically got the Warriors dragged for 2 days. And Steph Curry personally dragged for 2 days in the national and local, by the way, discourse as to whether or not they were giving up on the season. And I think you have to remember the context in which this was said. This is following a loss to an 8-31, then 9. They did beat Boston, I think, on Wednesday, Toronto Raptors team. But it's in the context of under 500 for the season. It's under the context of 7-17 in the last 24 after the 12-3 start. It's in the context of low point with the team going to Minnesota, and it was a no hope, kind of a moment. And it was also a moment, and I addressed this on Dubs OT Monday night after the game against Toronto. It was also the first game all year where watching the game, and I think a lot of people felt this way, watching the game in Toronto, even when the Warriors had the lead and the Raptors would come back and the Warriors would build the lead back up and the Raptors would come back, you got to the top of the fourth quarter and the Warriors are up 9. And I'm texting Kyle Haar and I'm texting Greg Silver. Like, the outcome of the game truly felt like it didn't matter. Like, they could win the game. They don't have enough. They could lose the game. It's going to be a new low. And boy, was it. Because that, coupled with the record and what Steph Curry had to say that we just played, led to the Warriors getting roasted for 2 days straight and then having a nationally televised game against the Mavs on top of that. So but it was the first time where, yeah, you know what? This team does not have enough. Whatever your definition, whatever your goal is, play-in tournament, 6 seed, title contender, like, they don't have enough. And again, I already knew they didn't have enough to win a title. I think anybody with a brain could have figured that one out, even when they were 12-3. Although maybe the way the season started changed the way this team was viewed a little bit in those first 15 games. But to me, it was more this team can't be a playoff team as they're currently constituted. It got viewed as if the Warriors were quitting, punting, biding their time. Fair or unfair? I personally think it was fair. Why? Because there are 42 freaking games left in the season. You are champions. It doesn't mean you have to win a title. It doesn't mean you have to get to the finals. It doesn't mean you have to get to the conference finals. Hell, it doesn't even mean you have to win a playoff series or even get in a playoff series. But the notion that you're acknowledging there may not be anything to be done, it was a bad look. Misinterpreted or not, it was a bad look. And then the Warriors are going to Minnesota, and they got crushed for 2 days. And Steph, I think, personally got crushed for 2 days as the face of the franchise, as the superstar. And so they go out and they beat Minnesota. And with the win against Minnesota, I thought Steph played angry in that game. Hey, by the way, maybe you need a little more of that. And I get it. He's banged up. He's getting older. Team around him isn't as good. But that energy, that fight, like that to me is energy and fight. That's energy and fight. When Steve Kerr talks about dignity and fighting, and you could have lost that game too, by the way, and would have lost it in catastrophic give-it-away fashion had they. But that's fight. Steph Curry getting pissed off, if he was pissed off about what, like that's the level that I think Warrior fans want to see, win or lose, playoff or no playoff, championship or 12th in the West. That's what you want to see. So Steph led the way. Wiggins was playing. They hit some threes. They played great defense early. The Timberwolves didn't take them seriously and have their own issues. All of those things equally true. So let's get to postgame Wednesday, because then the energy shifted. For how long will it last remains to be seen. This was Steve Kerr first postgame after the win, doubling back on some of the chatter over the days leading up.
We didn't talk about it as a team. We're used to being in the spotlight. If there's a story about our team, it's going to go everywhere, and everyone's going to talk about it. And I hope there's not a misconception that we're not fighting and scrapping and hoping, that we can, do everything possible to keep this thing going, because that's what we're doing. But it almost feels like the narrative became, the Warriors are giving in. We're not giving in. We're just not going to give away the future. That's the two totally different things. So we're fighting. You can see we've been competitive all year. We've had a few blowouts, but for the most part, our guys are competing like crazy. They play so hard every night, and just really nice to see them get rewarded, because it's a great group of guys.
All right, not giving in. There you go. You hear it from Steve Kerr. I hope there's not a misconception that we're not fighting and scrapping and doing everything possible to keep this thing going. Well, Steve, there was the misconception because you guys all said it. You said the quiet part out loud. Like, yeah, you know what? We kind of all discussed it and know we don't have enough. And so, hey, this is what it is. Hey, but show up for the last 42. Keep watching, keep rooting, keep hoping. It intentionally or unintentionally, again, it wasn't the right message. I don't think it was anybody twisting a narrative. I really don't. I think they brought it up. I think it was good that, albeit easier to do after you win the game at Minnesota and fight back and show some of the things that have not consistently been there during this 25-game stretch. And again, it's not just, are you playing hard, right? Like anybody can say, oh, we're not getting blown out, we're playing hard. Are you playing smart? Are you losing because you just aren't as talented? Are you losing because you're not executing? Fine line there. But yeah, I think that narrative had to be addressed. And the proof will be in how the Warriors come out. I mean, if they come out and lose to Washington tonight, the Wizards have got 6 wins. You come out and lose to Washington tonight, and it's going right back into the what the hell is this team doing? Are they giving up? Should they give up? It will get really ugly really fast at that particular point in time. So Steve Kerr addressed it, rightfully so. I give him credit for doing so. And then you got Steph Curry, and I want to play Q before P. Kyle, we got Kyle Haar in our studios. Let's play Q before P as Steph addressed the fact that he's just cool with this thing continuing as it has been.
Anybody who thinks that I'm okay with just being an average average basketball team is insane. Take whatever I said, I still stand on it, but that doesn't mean that you're not in a situation where you're trying to get better, make appropriate moves that help you do that. Mike knows that. We've talked about it. That's the expectation for me, trying to help lead the team where we want to go. Again, that doesn't mean that you're reckless. What people's definition of that is where I was talking about the Twitter fingers thing. Like, trade machines are fun, but what does that actually look like? So we're going to handle our business. Mike's going to handle his, see where we end up.
Yeah, and again, I think they have to do something. And yeah, Steph Curry calling out the Twitter fingers. He calling out JD? Is he calling out Andis Brown? Is he calling out Rockadoo? I think he was calling out Kyle Haar. Kyle loves to get on he loves the hypothetical trades and throwing them out there on X or Threads or Blue Sky. What's the new one? Blue Sky Social. I'm on it, but I'm like half-ass on it. But yeah, look, again, Curry addressed it. It needed to be addressed. I don't think anybody thinks he's okay being on an average team. And I think part of this was the Warriors collectively trying, as they continue to take L's, aside from their games against Minnesota, but as they continue to take L's, I feel like the rest of the league is like, oh, the Warriors are going to do something dumb. Warriors are going to make this panicky trade. As we had the Marcus Thompson clip coming back from the break, he's talking about Joe Lacob saying, hey, nobody's more impatient, wants to do something than Joe Lacob, which I believe to be true. But he's also, and I think collectively they're also at a point where they want to win trades on paper. They want the trades to help on the floor. But I think there is they're running all their models and analytics and how much is this going to help what? And again, that's all part of just the way things are done. But at some point, and again, maybe it is just too soon. Maybe what Marcus said was correct. A lot of times there aren't a ton of deals that end up getting done until the last couple of days before the deadline. And that's still how I think this thing shakes out. But the perception sometimes can beat reality. And the perception is that the Warriors are comfortable with inactivity. And I think when you look at the way this team has played and competed in the 8-17 stretch, the inactivity and the contentness with where they are means it's only going to get worse, not better. And I think that's the part that's a little bit scary, because I don't think anybody wants to see this team, because there's only a couple of different options, right? If you're not going all in, I understand the reasons not to. Maybe the player doesn't exist. But this whole stuck in the middle thing, like, what normally do franchises do if you're not going to go all in and you're stuck in the mid and you hate it, well, what you do is you look to trade your star player. Or sometimes your star player asks out. Well, Steph Curry's not doing that. In fact, Steph Curry signed an extension for another year. So there isn't that easy out. Like the easy out is we're done winning titles. We want to win titles. We don't want to be stuck in the mid. You're going to trade your superstar, which, again, they're not a unique position. Top 10 player of all time. Guy wants to play his entire career with the Warriors. Warrior fans, at a minimum, would love to continue to watch Steph Curry for 2-3 more years, as opposed to not. So I think that's something to continue to keep in mind. But yeah, I don't think anybody believes that Steph is okay with being on an average team. Do they look to make moves, though, with 3 weeks to go until the deadline? Here's how Steph Curry addressed that part of the conversation.
I'm always motivated and challenged to compete and try to win, do my job. When you're in a situation like our organization is, where everything is rightfully so compared to, that championship expectation, everything's going to get micro analyzed. Obviously, what I'm talking about, Draymond's talking about, Steve's talking about, you forget the part where we're talking about we're always trying to get better. Like, what does that actually mean? It's obviously not our job to worry about that on a daily basis. And these 3 weeks before the trade deadline, like, our job is to win as many games as possible.
And I think those two things go hand in hand. I think if they can win as many games as possible between now and February 5th, I think they put themselves in more of a position of advantage to make even the middling or the fringe trades. So it all does, in fact, I think, work out to the best possible outcome if the Warriors wind up doing that. Now, are they going to be capable of that? We shall see. I mean, that's where you start to look at the games that are ahead here. And, tonight should be a win. I hate doing that. Tonight should be a win. They've played well against Boston the last few years. Boston hasn't won a chase in a minute. And, the Kings are a bad matchup right now for them. So that's going to be a tough game. But then it's the Bulls, so there are some games. I mean, you're playing Washington, you're playing Chicago, you're playing Utah at home coming up here, but you've also got a lot of games against teams that are right there where you are. Sacramento, bad matchup. The Lakers have been kind of a bad matchup for the Warriors when LeBron and Anthony Davis have played. Lost to them on Christmas. Then you've got a couple of great teams coming in. You got defending champs Monday. You got OKC. Orlando's a good team. The Suns are in that category of teams that are right there with them, like Sacramento, and the Lakers are slightly ahead of them. So it really is, you look at the next 10, it really is two great teams coming in. It's 3 really bad teams, and then it's basically 5 games against teams that are basically where you are, as far as where these games are coming from. A couple of games against Utah there. So I mean, there are 4 or 5 wins, I feel like, in the next 10. As much as this team can't count wins against anybody. But the question is, can they get a 4-6, 5-5 baseline with a couple extra wins up to maybe a 7-3 in the next 10 and get to 4 over and give themselves a spot to add a little bit on the margins? Because I think if they're 7-3 for this team in the next 10, then there's probably a 3-7 if they keep this team together past the deadline and the 10 that come after that. And you end up looking up and you're 34-34 and battling with San Antonio and Phoenix and maybe Sacramento for who's going to be 9, 10, 11 or on the outside looking in. which I don't think is the position you really want to be in. So another wild week. What do you do if you're the Warriors? 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627. Let's get to a quick timeout, actually. Let's take a quick timeout. We'll come back. We'll dive into the YouTube chat. A lot to discuss here. Got a couple of text messages to get to as well. But if you want to jump in and join the conversation, what's the best course of action for the Warriors with the trade deadline just under 3 weeks away and the Warriors beginning this critical stretch tonight with 8 of the next 9 at home and 10 games to go before the deadline? It's KNBR 104.5 and 680, the sports leader.
Dub Nation, this is the real and inside story on Warriors basketball. Just Dubs with John Dickinson now continues, streaming live at twitch.tv/thesportsleader.
I've never heard an interview like this from a player in midseason. Now, I'm going to try to point out that it was a cold January Monday night in Toronto, and maybe we shouldn't take declarations into too much account there. But on the other hand, those stages of loss, it sounds like Steph Curry is at acceptance stage. I mean, to me, I can't say for sure what conversations he's had with their front office, but my belief would be he has communicated that to them as well, that, there's no reason for you to go chasing something to fix a team that maybe it would be a desperate move. And that is going to reverberate. And this is so unusual for a star player to say. I mean, LeBron operates and has for decades exactly the opposite. He says, trade the 2031 first round pick. I don't care about that. This is Steph talking about leaving the franchise better than he found it. Guess what? You're leaving the franchise better than you found it. I promise you. And if anything, it's the franchise that owes him the last couple of years of his career. So this was a remarkable interview on a lot of fronts. Yeah. And I'm going to be honest with you, when you listen to him talk like that, it makes you wonder that the Warriors, who've been sniffing around a star player since last summer, that instead of doing that, they may do the opposite and make a trade to save money because they're not far away from the luxury tax, because it sounds like they've got Steph's sign off on it. So this was truly a remarkable moment in the season.
Well, and Brian Windhorst there of ESPN, part of the discussion, I think that was a big part of, and Windhorst wasn't the only one, but a big part of why Steph kind of clapped back in the manner that he did following the win at Minnesota. Now, is he able to do that at the level that he did if the Warriors don't win at Minnesota and they sit 2 games under 500? Maybe, maybe not. As we welcome you back here, Just Dubs with JD here on the Sports Leader. 808 KNBR. We'll get to Eric and Bob coming up momentarily. The other factor is what Windhorst said there at the end, which is because we've discussed, hey, all right, maybe there isn't a big move to be made for a star. I'm of the belief that this team should look to shuffle the deck and make even middling type trades to try and improve this roster on the margins, because I still think they're close enough. And with an infusion of a couple of players can get to the 6th seed like that should be something that's worth fighting for, even if you don't think this team can win an NBA championship, especially with over half a season to go. But the last part of what Windhorst had to say, I think, is also important, because we've discussed those scenarios. He brought up a third scenario, and this is the scenario that I think has the potential to be in play if the Warriors can't come up with a move and they continue to be right at 500 or maybe even dip slightly below again as they get to the deadline and fall farther away from the pack. It would be do you just trade for some salary relief? Do you look to move off of Wiggins' salary? And then at that point, and again, Wiggins has been a productive player. Wiggins is somebody that I wouldn't just be moving for anybody. I was correct in the assessment that he was not an addition by subtraction player in the offseason. I would not have included him in an offseason deal for Zach LaVine. You'd fix your offense and you'd be terrible defensively had you done that. And now that being said, and we'll get to Jordan Poole's return a little bit and how it relates to Chris Paul and the Warriors not using Chris Paul's contract to go get Zach LaVine, which is something I would have done, would not have included Wiggins for LaVine, would have traded Chris Paul's expiring contract for Zach LaVine as a buy low, use that slot for something. The Warriors chose not to do that. They went a different path. They got a bunch of the role players that are currently on the roster, but that is sort of the give up path that I think is in play here. The notion of, well, not going to make it, further tear it down, further, the lack of spending, or get the financial house in order and create potentially another hole that would need to be filled. Now, I don't know that the Warriors would necessarily look to do that, but the way you get under the tax is Wiggins and others. And so, be hard pressed to think that hasn't been discussed, because I think the Warriors do kind of discuss everything. That would truly be a loser move if they look to do that. But again, I think all things currently, other than going all in and making a bad deal for a star that doesn't exist, are on the table here as the Warriors sit at the pivot point of their season, 20-20, with the 10 games to go before the trade deadline, and 8 of those 10 to be played in Chase Center. All right, let's get to the phones. 808 KNBR, Eric and Millbrae up here on the Sports Leader. What's going on, Eric? How you doing, man?
Man, what's up, man? Yeah, to me, a Warrior fan's got to be realistic. Going from these home run swings like Butler or Zion, those are not realistic in my mind, and those are guys you really don't want. Butler because of his age and his contract demands, and Zion because he's not professional and he's shown he can play, he can stay on the court. So that's what you don't want to avoid, having another guy who rarely ever plays. To me, the only realistic guy that I could see that I think would be an upgrade is you don't have to break the hull and break up your whole roster to get is Vucevic. I think the Bulls are reeling. I think they could, even without Kuminga, I think his salary is not so out of control. I think he would be perfect and play perfectly with pick and pop with Curry, or he's a guy who could score off the ball. He doesn't really need to drain the lane. He can play perfectly in the Warriors system. I want to get your opinion on how realistic it is to get somebody like him, because I think the Bulls are really in no man's land, and I think he's the guy you can get in. As far as the Warriors themselves, just stay the course. You got a critical stretch of games here now at home. Tonight, I'm expecting, even though they've been so up and down at home, I think they could beat up the Wizards. They're awful. And then I'm going to the game on Monday night. They've already shown they can beat Boston. They beat them in Boston. So this is where you got to make your hay here and get out of the play-in round. So this is critical now and going forward. Just be consistent. Now, the Warriors have been so up and down after the 12-3 start. If they could just get on course and play their type of ball, and they've shown they can beat some of the elite teams like OKC in the league, that's what they need to do. So hopefully starting tonight and going forward through this whole stretch of games and into the All-Star break, they can really get going here. So these are a stretch of games. Hopefully we want to see him get on track. But and Curry, I love his attitude. We're not going to tear it down. We still want to make a run at it, and hopefully the rest of the guys follow course and get in line with him. And I'll get your thoughts on that. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. As far as Vucevic is gettable. I would not want to give up a first-round pick for Vucevic unless it's like top 20 protected. I understand, again, the Warriors maybe wanting to wait that out. That being said, I do think Vucevic helps. I think he's a regular season help in a big way. And look, it's the old 82-game player versus 16-game player. Vucevic is an 82-game player. And I think the Warriors need a few more of those guys that aren't maybe perfect playoff players, but help you get through the night-to-night grind of an NBA season. And if you have Vucevic, you probably don't lose to Toronto. That kind of thing. Like I feel like those games happen fewer and farther between. If you have Vucevic, you know what? Maybe Domantas Sabonis still kills you, but Vucevic also puts up 23 on him with 14 rebounds, and they kind of cancel each other out, as opposed to, just kind of letting him have his way as he's done against Trace Jackson Davis a couple of different times. And then he gets everybody else involved. And then you've got, a team with the inability to keep up. So I think Vucevic helps you as much as he is a terrible defender. I wouldn't want to give up a lot for him. A couple of second-round picks and salary filler. I also think part of why you go get Vucevic is he's got, $21 million, I think, on his contract for next year. So part of why you get him because you would be trading expiring money to Chicago to give Chicago the relief off of his salary for next year. And, you would be sending a couple of picks back as well. So you're doing it basically for a couple of second-round picks in addition to getting Vucevic and allowing him to get off that salary. But it also puts a salary on the books for next year that can be put into a deal in the offseason if you want to make a deal. Like Vucevic can be sent somewhere else in part of a deal that you're getting the star player that maybe you can't get now that comes available. So I think there's a lot of benefit. That being said, I understand the internal debate that is probably waging on as with the Warriors. As like Vucevic is not a guy that Steve Kerr would want to be comfortable closing games with every night. What would the closing lineup be? Is it Vucevic and Draymond and Wiggins? If it's Vucevic, then it's probably not Kuminga. There is. That being said, though, there's going to be games where Draymond's not playing, and you can play Kuminga and Wiggins together with Vucevic and Steph and Schroeder. Again, I'm not as caught up in that because that's more of a regular season problem. But if this team wound up in a playoff series, I think Vucevic would be one of the first guys that winds up playing less and less and less and less. The issue, though, is you got to get to that playoff series. And so I would be pro Vucevic, again, assuming you don't give up a lot necessarily to get him. Bob in Saratoga, 808 KNBR next year on the Sports Leader. Hey, Bob.
Hey, a couple things. First of all, our biggest need, I think, is a big man. And when we hear talks about trading Jackson Davis, that's ridiculous. He's the only big man we have since Bogut. Secondarily, we're losing too many close games by two major reasons: missing foul shots and throwing away ridiculous passes. To start finding these guys on those two items, because we would have won a lot more games if they stopped or correct those two mistakes. Lastly, Wiggins is a good player, but last year he was absent most of the time, probably for some good reasons, but it's always a personal reason or he doesn't feel well. So I think if we do trade anybody, we should trade him because he's inconsistent and he's not available when we need him the most. The fact that he is our biggest scorer, or one of them, and he's a good rebounder and a good defensive player. That's it for me.
All right, thanks, Bob. Look, they have been really careless at the end of games. I mean, really, really tight at the end of games with some of the passing and turnovers. The foul shots are kind of the foul shots, right? It's who's shooting them. Kuminga's not a good free throw shooter. He's shooting them a lot. Wiggins is kind of up and down. Steph's great. If Draymond's on the line, flip a coin. Like, I get the foul shooting issue. It's in play, and the Warriors hit 18 of 21 in the game against Minnesota. They won the game. Who missed them? Who missed the free throws? GP2, late, not a great free throw shooter. And Wiggins missed 2, but was 10 of 12, so you'll take the 83% from Andrew Wiggins, but that still means you might miss a couple in an inopportune time. He hit his in the big moment for the Warriors in the game and was aggressive, which the Warriors need. They need that. Like, Andrew Wiggins played on that night, and part of the reason the Warriors were able to win that game was because he played on that night like a true bona fide number 2 option. He doesn't do that every night. And Buddy Hield was the 3 off the bench, and they got positive contributions from Moody, and they got positive contributions from Peyton, and they got positive contributions in terms of rebounding from TJD. So, those are the things that just consistently have not been there for the Warriors. The other part of the Vucevic deal is you give Vucevic, TJD ain't going to be playing as much. And so that sort of negates, I think Looney would probably be in the deal. Again, there are nights where Looney still really helps the Warriors. Like, all of these things are discussions, although Kevon Looney's somebody that's in the final year of his deal. And so I don't think he's obviously going to be coming back. GP2, final year of his deal, not going to be coming back. When GP2's healthy and available, he's a productive player. So how do you balance it all out? I think is a key part of the question. And I think a more significant part of the internal debate than I think the Twitter fingers, to use Steph Curry's line, really no. And so it's just they've got it has to strike the proper balance. Andis Brown in the YouTube chat, people don't realize Vooch playing at an all-star level, it's going to take a first or 2 firsts and players, or going to take Kuminga another you're not giving up Kuminga for Vucevic. That's not even a thought that's crossed my mind. You're not giving up Kuminga for Vucevic. You're not giving up multiple firsts. I think the Bulls right now are probably saying they want a first in addition to the salary relief. And I would imagine that there would be some discussions about the protections potentially for that first. But I also think, again, if you're the Warriors, like, this is a guy that part of the attraction for Vucevic is the fact that you're not going to have to give up a ton. And so, yeah, again, and if you are, then you don't make the move. I think at that point, as much as I'm somebody that's pro move, I want moves, transactions, even on the margins, shuffle the deck. Because isn't part of this, and Kyle, I'm going to bring you in. I know we got a break. I'm going to bring you in real quick. Isn't part of this just the night to night when the Warriors are not playing well? Like, there are games where they do play well, but on nights the Warriors are not playing well. Because you're a Warrior fan, I want to get more of the fan perspective on this. Isn't it to the point where you just kind of you're just kind of sick of watching the same, not Steph and Draymond, and maybe not even Wiggins, but when they're not playing well, I feel like Warrior fans are just, it's like, enough with Buddy and even Looney and GP2 and TJD and like the guys that have been here. Like, I feel like there's a staleness to when they don't play well, where Warrior fans are like, I'm sick of watching the same guys make the same mistakes. Give me new guys that might do some things well, that might make different mistakes, just to kind of shuffle it up a little bit.
Oh no, yeah. I feel like every other game, they're making the same mistakes, and the really bad games, it's like I'm watching at high school. I'm like, it's turnover. So I think adding new bodies will at least bring a little bit more interest, because there is a staleness factor that you mentioned. So I think bringing in a Vucevic, bringing in I don't know who else is out there, but bring in some kind of spark. I mean, even though Dennis Schroeder hasn't been performing that great as a Warrior, I still like him, and
you
I
did something.
Yeah,
you did something.
Yeah, and like I still want to cheer for him.
Right. You don't hate him yet. Sports hate. Hate in the sports hate, not in the real hate. Andis Brown as well, more on Vucevic. From what I read, he's okay being in Chicago, still under contract for one more year at a good price. Yeah, right around $21 million. The Bulls can want what they want for him, and yes, you're right. The Bulls can hang on to him for another year, and that's sort of what the Bulls have done with a lot of their guys. I mean, you talk about being stuck in Mediocreville. I mean, that's what Chicago's been. They kind of mismanaged the DeRozan thing, where they ended up not getting anything for DeRozan. Coming back when he made the choice to go to Sacramento. They have had multiple opportunities to trade LaVine, didn't trade him low, which now he's playing better. But again, I know there was a chat about estimated eyes brought up Zion. There was a little back and forth. I would not trade Draymond for Zion, although you would wonder how Zion and Draymond play together. That would be an interesting component to it. But I would gamble on Zion. I put me in the category of would you, and I would even give up Kuminga for Zion if that was what it would be, because I think Zion, when he's healthy, is a franchise level player, whether it's number one or number two, however you want to put it. I mean, it'd be two with the Warriors joining Steph, but he actually would give you a shot to be that's a second timeline number one, but he's got to be healthy, and he's got to be in shape, and he's got to not be a knucklehead. So, all those things are part of but that's part of the risk. If those things weren't in play, the health and the attitude and the weight, then he wouldn't be available. And because he's too talented, he's too good a player. I think Zion, put me in the would go get Zion. I would entertain John Collins, but again, what are you giving up for John Collins? Maybe we'll get into that coming back. And I also want to, with Jordan Poole returning tonight again to face the Warriors, faced him last year, I do want to get into the Jordan Poole trade a little bit. And a couple of people in the chat, JD, how many Poole goes for tonight? 23. I'll say 23. I think he's averaging 21.4. He's having a bounce back year for Jordan Poole. How do you view the Jordan Poole trade now? I want to get some thoughts on that between now and noon. Final segment straight ahead. It is Just Dubs with JD on the Sports Leader.
Just Dubs with John Dickinson keeps rolling. Streaming live on YouTube at KNBR 1045.
That 24-hour news cycle is hilarious at times. The fact that nobody's complacent here, nobody is okay with just being average. All the Twitter fingers who's got deals that we need to make can kind of just shut up a little bit and let us figure this thing out. Like we know we can be competitive. We showed that toughness tonight. Obviously, every team is trying to find ways to get better, and for us, we've been great for a very long time. This is just a unique year where we have to be able to stay relevant and give ourselves a chance and just have some life in the playoff series. And we have a whole lot of confidence that we can, beat anybody. So, that's it.
Well, you got to get there. You got to get to the playoffs, Steph. Shut up with all the Twitter fingers and looking to make trades. And we shall see. We shall see their commitment to competitiveness. It was there on Wednesday night. There's zero doubt about it. But I think the next 10 games are going to tell the story here. If they're 25-25, 10 games from now, with some ugly losses and a couple of, a nice one. Oh, they beat Boston, but they lost to Utah or Chicago. Well, beat Boston, but lost at home to Chicago. Got run out of the gym in Sacramento again. No, beat Phoenix, but lost to the Lakers. Beat Washington, lost to Orlando. Beat Utah a couple times. That's two of the five. I don't know. We'll see. The proof is in the Warriors' level of play in terms of their commitment. It's one thing to say it, but you got to go out and do it. And again, I'm not one that's saying you have to go all in for a star. Jordan Poole back at Chase tonight again, playing better basketball than he did last year. Going back, I was just kind of looking at the Jordan Poole trade again back in 2023. Warriors got Chris Paul from the Wizards for Jordan Poole. Wizards also received Patrick Baldwin Jr., Ryan Rollins, who's now with the Bucks, the 2027 pick, second-round pick, a 2030 first-round pick, top 20 protected, and cash considerations. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the Jordan Poole trade as if, the Warriors really screwed that up. And I think the circumstances relating to it and obviously with the punch and everything that happened with Draymond Green is a huge part of that discussion, because he basically needed to be moved because of that and the inability for it to continue in the Warriors locker room. And there was also, and look, it was Mike Dunleavy's first move basically with the quickness, getting off of that contract, which had the potential, given the way Poole had finished the 22-23 season, to look really bad. Really bad. So I understood it at the time. The part that still stands out to me of the Jordan Poole deal is not you traded him for Chris Paul. It's not that you traded him at all. It's not what he could become or has become, or maybe is getting down the road of being with the Wizards, although they've won, 6 games. To me, the big issue with the Jordan Poole trade is the fact that the Warriors didn't use Chris Paul to get somebody else when they could have. That's the error. And the Warriors chose to not do that, which freed up the ability to do, get Kyle Anderson, get Buddy Hield, those moves, get DeAnthony Melton, over basically shipping Chris Paul to, say, Chicago for Zach LaVine, or going and getting a big ticket kind of a player. They chose to get their financial house in order, let the Chris Paul deal expire, which opened the door to these other moves that they eventually made in the offseason that looked like they were going to pay some dividends during the 12-3 start as the season's gone on, obviously, and Melton got hurt and Buddy Hield's been diminished in terms of his impact. Kyle Anderson really just hasn't played a lot, been buried. in part by Jonathan Kuminga's emergence, and then just not quite as effective because the Warriors, like Kyle Anderson needs to be a connector, but for Kyle Anderson to play, he has to be out there on the court with some other offensive players so he can be one of the guys who aren't necessarily a great offensive player in terms of scoring, so he can connect the game and play excellent defense and do those things. But the Warriors just don't. It's a weird thing to say, but they just don't have enough talent to put offensive talent consistently to put Kyle Anderson on the floor and allow for him to do the things that he does well. But yeah, it's not so much what Jordan Poole could become as it was for me, the fact that they didn't, part of it was you're flipping Poole, you're getting off his money, but you're bringing an asset back that you can use to go get somebody else. And then the Warriors didn't look to go get somebody else. And I think I understand the reasons they did it and what it freed up. But you look back on it now as this team still sits here basically exactly where they were a year ago. And I think that's a whiff at this point. I think that's one that and it's ever changing, but I think that's when you look at as a no-go as it relates to that. No Cap 757 in the chat. One thing I respect about the Suns owner, Matt Ishbia, though it hasn't worked out, he never stops trying to improve around the stars. He doesn't care about the second apron either. Eventually they will get Jimmy. Yeah, I would agree with that. I will agree with that. No Cap also adding the reporting has come out. Warriors don't want to give up a first-round pick. They don't want to give up Draymond, Kuminga, Wiggins, or a first. Well, then you're not going to get much done in terms of the big. But again, none of the moves that I'm talking about would require them to give up Draymond or Kuminga or Wiggins. Now, I would give up Kuminga for Cam Johnson. Sounds like the Kings are the front runners, by the way, for Cam Johnson, which I think he would really help them. I don't know. Again, I don't know who they're going to give up. Are they going to give up a couple of first-round picks for Cam Johnson? They probably shouldn't be the team that's giving up future first-round picks, in fairness, because who knows what's going to happen with the Aaron Fox and whether they end up having to move him at some point later. I mean, that's an interesting discussion, but Cam Johnson's a good freaking player, man. What if it turns out that Sacramento can get Cam Johnson for 2 first-round picks and they don't have to give up Keegan Murray and they're able to offload Kevin Huerter in a deal? And because I got to think the Kings wouldn't be doing that deal unless they're doing the deal and they're not giving up Keegan Murray or obviously DeRozan or Sabonis or Fox. So that's interesting. That would give them another shooter, which is something that believe it or not they've lacked as much as their offensive prowess has been when they play well, their offensive prowess is at a high level. So, all right, good stuff today. Great show. Appreciate not only Kyle Haar, but the great Raf Corral in our San Francisco studios. Apologies, didn't get a chance to get to everybody in the chat, in the comments, but I'm going to take some notes out of the comments here, and I'm going to save a few for tonight on Dubs OT. So join us for Dubs OT tonight. And then join me at Harmonic, not only tonight, but Monday before the game, 12 to 2, and after the game, Greg Silver will be on hand. We'll do a full Dubs OT meet and greet event out there for the Natty at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City. So for Kyle and Raf, I'm JD. Keep it locked right here on KNBR 104.5 and 680, the Sports Leader.